It's a phrase that seems simple, almost too simple. But if you sit with it for a moment, it's the tension that shapes our lives every single day. Most of us don't lose ourselves in one dramatic moment. We don't wake up one morning and suddenly forget who we are. We lose ourselves in small doses, in tiny compromises, in drifting from the clarity we once had. And the reason is almost always the same. We forget to lead ourselves. We think of leadership as something external, something we do when we're in charge of other people, when we have a team, when we're given a title. But the truth is, the first and hardest person you ever have to lead is yourself. And the stakes couldn't be higher, because if you don't lead yourself, you don't just stand still. You lose yourself. You drift, you disconnect, you get pulled in directions you never chose. Think about it. How many times have you looked back and thought, how did I get here? It wasn't because you made one terrible decision. It was because you weren't steering. Life has a way of putting you on autopilot. There are emails to answer, deadlines to meet, bills to pay. And if you don't pause, if you don't decide, the days begin to decide for you. Suddenly you're not choosing your direction, you're reacting to circumstances. That's not leading, that's drifting. And drifting always leads to losing. Here's the thing about clarity, it's not about having all the answers. It's about knowing your why. Why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you pursuing the career you've chosen? The habits you've built, the relationships you keep. If the answer is vague or absent, it means you're being carried, not leading. Clarity doesn't mean certainty, it means direction. It's the difference between saying, I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I know what I'm working toward, and saying, I'll just see what happens. One of those paths is leadership. The other is loss. Leading yourself requires discipline. And I don't mean the harsh, punishing kind of discipline. I mean the discipline of intentional choices. Every morning when you wake up, you're at a crossroads. You can choose by default. Grab your phone, scroll endlessly, fall into the familiar patterns that require no thought, or you can choose with intention. You can set aside 5 minutes of stillness. You can decide to take one action that serves your future, not just your comfort. That's what self-leadership looks like. It's not glamorous. Nobody applauds when you choose to exercise instead of hitting snooze, or when you open a book instead of mindlessly scrolling. But those choices shape whether you're leading or losing. And this is where values come in. Your values are your compass. They tell you what matters most. They anchor you when the world pulls you in 100 directions. Without values, you're tossed around by every wave of opinion, every cultural trend, every comparison to someone else's life. You start chasing what looks shiny instead of what feels true. That's how you lose yourself. But when your values guide you, every choice, even the small, invisible ones, keeps you aligned. You don't just move forward, you move forward as yourself. One of the greatest misunderstandings about self-leadership is that it requires massive, heroic actions. What it requires is consistency. Small, steady, intentional steps. Leading yourself isn't about suddenly transforming overnight. It's about choosing today to do the thing that your future self will thank you for. It's about building trust with yourself through action. When you say you're going to do something and you follow through, you're proving to yourself that you can be counted on. And when you break those promises, you begin to doubt yourself. That's the quiet erosion of self-leadership. Let me give you an example. Imagine you commit to writing for 10 minutes a day, just 10 minutes. It's so small it almost feels silly. But if you keep that promise, day after day, you're not just producing words, you're shaping an identity. You're becoming the kind of person who does what they said they would do. Now flip it. Imagine you say you'll write, but every day you find an excuse. No big deal, right? Just a small broken promise. But over time, those broken promises add up. They become a story you tell yourself. I'm not disciplined. I can't stick to things. I don't follow through. That's losing yourself. Not because you lack talent or opportunity, but because you stopped leading yourself. Ownership is the defining line between leading and losing. When you own your choices, you own your life. When you blame circumstances or people or timing, you hand over your power. You're no longer leading, you're waiting for someone else to decide your future. And the waiting never ends. But ownership is liberating, because when you own your choices, even the hard ones, you realize you're not at the mercy of life. You're steering. You may not control the wind, but you can adjust your sails. Here's the irony. Many of us are good at leading others before we learn to lead ourselves. We show up for our teams, our families, our friends. We keep our promises to them. But when it comes to ourselves, we let things slide. We forgive ourselves too easily for quitting, for avoiding, for drifting. But how can you expect others to follow you if you're not even following yourself? Leadership starts internally. If you want to be trusted, you first have to trust yourself. If you want to inspire others, you first have to inspire yourself with your own example. Self-leadership isn't about perfection. You'll fail, you'll stumble, you'll drift at times. But the point isn't to never get lost. It's to notice when you are and choose to lead again. To stop and say, this isn't where I want to be, I need to course correct. That humility, that awareness, is what separates those who keep leading themselves from those who slowly disappear into lives they never wanted. So the question isn't, am I leading a team? Or am I in a position of authority? The question is, am I leading myself today? Did I make choices that aligned with who I want to become? Did I keep promises I made to myself? Did I live out my values even when no one was watching? That's the real measure. You're either leading yourself or losing yourself. There is no neutral. Every choice is a vote. Every action is a direction. And the cost of not leading is higher than most of us realize. It's not just missed opportunities or unfulfilled potential. It's the quiet loss of identity. It's waking up one day and not recognizing the person in the mirror. But the beauty of this truth is that you can decide differently. Right now. Leading yourself isn't about waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect plan. It's about one decision, one intentional step. Choose clarity over drift. Choose discipline over default. Choose values over noise. Choose ownership over blame. Because at the end of the day, the most important person who needs your leadership is you. And if you can lead yourself with clarity, consistency, and courage, you won't just avoid losing yourself. You'll discover who you truly are. There's a tension we all live with everyday discipline or default. It sounds harsh, but it's not about punishment. It's about whether we are intentional or whether we let life decide for us. Discipline is the tool of self-leadership. Default is the trap of self-abandonment. One path builds who we're becoming, the other path erodes it quietly, invisibly, until we wake up wondering why we feel so far from ourselves. Think about the way most mornings begin. The alarm goes off. There's that pause, that tiny moment of choice. Do I get up now or do I hit snooze? It seems so small, almost laughably insignificant, but it's in those small choices that our future is shaped. Discipline says, you made a promise to yourself, keep it. Default says, it's fine, tomorrow you'll start fresh. One of those paths builds trust with yourself. The other slowly chips it away. Discipline is not about forcing yourself into a rigid, joyless routine. It's not about grinding for the sake of grinding. It's about being intentional. It's about choosing what matters most over what feels easiest right now. It's not always dramatic. In fact, most of the time it's boring. It looks like shutting your laptop at a certain time because you promised yourself to protect your sleep. It looks like taking the walk, making the call, doing the task that future you will thank you for. Even though present you would rather avoid it, default, on the other hand, is seductive. It whispers, just one more scroll, just one more episode, just one more day off the habit. And the danger is, default doesn't feel destructive in the moment. It feels comfortable. It feels easy. But comfort without direction always has a cost. Default leads us to a place where our lives are no longer the product of our decisions, but of our excuses. And that's where we begin to lose ourselves. The most dangerous thing about default is that it disguises itself as harmless. Skipping the gym once doesn't ruin your health. Delaying the project once doesn't destroy your career. Ignoring your values once doesn't erase your integrity. But when those just once moments stack up, they build momentum. Suddenly, weeks turn into months, and the identity you wanted to build never arrives. Not because you didn't dream big enough, but because you defaulted too often. Discipline, on the other hand, builds quietly. You rarely see immediate results. It's frustrating because we live in a culture obsessed with instant gratification. We want the body in a month, the success in a week, the breakthrough in a day. But leadership, especially self-leadership, doesn't work that way. Discipline is invisible at first. You won't see the impact of one workout, one practice session, one moment of resisting distraction. But stack them, repeat them, stay with them, and suddenly you wake up 6 months later and realize you become someone different. Someone stronger, someone more reliable, someone you trust. That's the power of discipline. It transforms identity. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you cast a vote for the person you want to become. And every time you break one, you cast a vote for the person you fear becoming. That's why self-leadership isn't measured in grand achievements, but in daily consistency. The leader inside you is built not when it's convenient, but when it's difficult. The question then becomes, how do we stay disciplined when default feels so tempting? The answer lies in vision. Discipline without vision feels like punishment. But when you connect discipline to a bigger why, it becomes purpose. It shifts from I have to I get to. Waking up early isn't about torture. It's about creating space for the life you said you wanted. Turning down distractions isn't about missing out. It's about honoring your own path. Discipline isn't a burden when it's tied to meaning. It becomes a form of respect for your time, your values, and your future self. I remember a friend who wanted to run a marathon. At the start, she hated running. Every step felt miserable. She had no natural talent for it, but she tied her discipline to something bigger. For her, it wasn't about the race. It was about proving to herself that she could commit to something hard and finish it. So every morning, when default whispered, "Stay in bed," discipline reminded her, this is who you said you want to become. And months later, when she crossed that finish line, it wasn't about the medal. It was about the identity she built in the process. That's what discipline does. It carves out the person you're proud to be. Default never does that. Default is the slow decay of your potential. It's not obvious at first, but over time, it's devastating. You don't notice you're losing yourself until the gap between who you are and who you want it to be feels overwhelming. The worst part of default isn't failure, it's regret. Failure is feedback, regret is final. Discipline may be hard now, but default is harder later. Here's the truth: we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our discipline. Everybody wants the outcome. Everybody wants growth, success, fulfillment. But not everyone wants to make the small, daily choices that lead there. That's why leadership begins with you. Because if you can't lead yourself into discipline, you'll default into a life that isn't truly yours. And let me be clear, discipline is not about never slipping. You will. We all do. But discipline means noticing, correcting, and returning to the path. Default means shrugging, excusing, and letting go of the path altogether. One builds resilience. The other builds resignation. Which one are you choosing? When we talk about self-leadership, it's easy to think about big, inspiring moments, taking a leap, starting a business, reinventing yourself. But those moments are built on the back of discipline. They're only possible because of the countless ordinary choices no one else saw. Self-leadership doesn't start on a stage. It starts in the quiet, unseen moments where you choose discipline over default. So tomorrow when you wake up, you'll face the same crossroads. You'll hear the same whispers of default. And you'll have the same opportunity to lead yourself. That moment won't be dramatic. Nobody else will notice. But you will, and that's enough. Because the difference between leading yourself and losing yourself is not made in a single grand decision. It's made in 1,000 small ones. You're either leading yourself or losing yourself. And in this context, the question is simple as, are you choosing discipline or are you living by default? Because in the end, discipline is freedom. Freedom to trust yourself. Freedom to live aligned with your values. Freedom to become who you were meant to be. Default feels free in the moment, but it always costs you more in the long run. So choose wisely, lead yourself. Don't lose yourself. We've talked about clarity, we've talked about discipline, but neither of those things lasts without something deeper. Your values. Values are the compass of self-leadership. They are what tell you if you're on course or drifting away. Without them, you can have all the ambition in the world, all the drive, all the hustle, and still lose yourself in the process. Because direction without values can still lead you off a cliff. Here's the challenge with values. Most people can't clearly state them. Ask someone what their values are, and you often get vague answers. Family, success, happiness. And while those are important, they're not really values. They're outcomes. They're feelings, they're categories. Values are more specific. They're the principles that guide your decisions when it's hard, when nobody's watching, when shortcuts look tempting. They're the lines you won't cross, even if crossing them makes life easier. When you lead yourself by values, you don't just chase what looks good, you pursue what feels true. That's a massive difference. Think about the times in your life when you felt proud of yourself. Not just happy, not just excited, but deeply proud. That pride almost always comes from living in alignment with your values. And think about the times you felt ashamed or unsettled. Chances are, it wasn't because you failed at something, it was because you compromised a value. That's the real definition of losing yourself. When you trade your values for convenience, approval, or short-term gain. The world is loud. Everywhere you look, there's pressure to achieve more, earn more, show more, compare more. And if you don't know what you stand for, you'll end up standing where everyone else tells you to. That's why people can be wildly successful on the outside and completely empty on the inside. They had discipline, they had direction. But they built it on the wrong foundation. They climbed a ladder that was leaning against the wrong wall because values weren't guiding them. Leading yourself by values requires courage. It's easy to say you value honesty until telling the truth costs you something. It's easy to say you value health until you're faced with the comfort of skipping the hard work. It's easy to say you value growth until growth requires sacrifice. Values are not proven in convenience. They're proven in conflict. They show up when sticking to them costs you time, money, status, or approval. And it's in those moments that leadership of self is either real or an illusion. I remember speaking with someone who built a business from nothing. He grew it into a company that most people would call wildly successful. But one day he walked away from it all. Not because it was failing, it was thriving. But he said, somewhere along the way, I stopped recognizing myself in the work. What happened? He started with values like service, integrity, community. But as growth came, he compromised piece by piece. He said yes to things he didn't believe in because they looked profitable. He made deals with people he didn't trust because they opened doors. And little by little, the business grew, but he shrank. Until one day, he realized he'd built a company, but lost himself. That's the danger when values aren't your compass. You might end up with success that doesn't feel like success. You might end up with achievements that feel hollow. You might end up celebrated on the outside, but broken on the inside. And the tragedy is the world will still applaud you, but you'll know the truth. That's what it means to lose yourself. Now, on the flip side, think about people who inspire us most. It's rarely because they were the richest or the most talented. It's usually because they stood for something. They knew their values and they lived them, even when it was costly. They led themselves with integrity, and that integrity drew others to them. That's the paradox of values. When you lead yourself with them, you don't just gain clarity for your own life. You become a guidepost for others too. But values don't just happen. They're not something you casually decide on a whim. You discover them by paying attention to your own life. When did you feel most alive? When did you feel most proud? When did you feel most betrayed or angry? Those moments reveal your values. If betrayal makes you furious, you probably value loyalty. If dishonesty keeps you up at night, you probably value integrity. If creating something gives you joy, you probably value creativity or contribution. Those clues are everywhere if you're willing to pay attention. And once you know them, you need to anchor them. Write them down, reflect on them, revisit them often. Because here's the truth, the world will constantly try to pull you away from them. Distractions, opportunities, and pressures will nudge you to compromise. And if your values aren't anchored, you'll drift. That's why leading yourself by values is a daily practice. It's not about being perfect, it's about recalibrating, it's about noticing when you've drifted and choosing to realign. The beauty of living by values is that it simplifies decisions. When you face a hard choice, you don't need to overthink it. You just ask, does this align with my values or not? And if it doesn't, the answer is no, even if it's the easier or more attractive option. That's what self-leadership looks like. It's not always glamorous. Sometimes it means turning down opportunities others would die for. Sometimes it means disappointing people. Sometimes it means walking away. But every time you choose values over compromise, you gain something greater, you keep yourself. Without values, discipline becomes aimless. You can be disciplined at chasing money, approval, status, or success. But discipline without values just makes you efficient at losing yourself faster. With values, discipline becomes meaningful. It's not just effort, it's alignment. It's not just activity, it's purpose. That's why values are the foundation. They make sure you're climbing the right ladder, and not just climbing quickly. And here's the irony, living by values doesn't just protect you from losing yourself, it also attracts the right people to you. When you're clear about who you are and what you stand for, you naturally repel those who don't align with you and draw those who do. That's why values are not just a compass for your own direction. They're also a filter for the people and opportunities that belong in your life. So when you think about leading yourself, ask, what do I stand for? What are the principles I will not compromise, no matter the cost? What matters so deeply to me that I'd rather fail by staying true than succeed by betraying it? Those are your values, and once you know them, guard them. Live them. Let them guide you when you're tired, when you're tempted, when you're afraid. Because if you don't, the noise of the world will gladly hand you a set of values that aren't yours, and that's how you lose yourself. At the end of the day, self-leadership is not just about achieving goals. It's about becoming someone you're proud to live with. And pride doesn't come from winning. It comes from alignment. It comes from knowing that the life you're building on the outside matches the values you hold on the inside. You're either leading yourself or losing yourself. And in this chapter of that truth, the choice is clear. Will you let your values guide you, or will you let the world decide for you? Because one path keeps you grounded, aligned, and whole. The other leaves you successful but empty. And no amount of applause will ever fill the void of a life built on compromises. There's a mistake so many of us make when it comes to growth. We think it has to happen all at once. We believe the real turning points are massive, life-altering events, a big decision, a major breakthrough, a bold leap. But the truth is, growth rarely comes in leaps. It comes in steps. Leading yourself is not about the occasional grand gesture. It's about small, consistent wins that, stacked together, shape who you become. The person you are today is not the result of one defining moment. It's the sum of the small things you've done over and over again, the daily choices, the tiny disciplines, the repeated behaviors. Those things multiplied by time shape your identity. And the danger is, if you don't lead yourself in those small moments, you don't just stall, you slowly lose yourself piece by piece, habit by habit. Think about trust. How is trust built? Not in a single act, not in one conversation. It's built through consistency. It's built when someone shows up again and again, when they do what they say they'll do. Over time, that reliability becomes trust. And the same is true for how you lead yourself. Every time you follow through on a small commitment, you build trust with yourself. Every time you break it, you erode that trust. That's why the little things matter so much more than we think. Because you can't lead yourself without trusting yourself. And trust is never built in leaps, it's built in layers. We all love the idea of transformation. We want the before and after story. We want to see the dramatic reveal. But transformation isn't dramatic when you're living it. It's subtle, it's ordinary, it's invisible in the moment. Nobody wakes up one morning suddenly in shape. Nobody writes a best-selling book in a single night. Nobody builds a meaningful relationship in one conversation. It's the accumulation of small intentional actions over time. That's what creates change. That's what creates identity. But here's the hard part. Small wins don't feel like wins at first. They feel insignificant. Reading 10 pages of a book feels trivial. Writing a single paragraph feels laughable. Going for a short walk feels like it doesn't matter. And that's where most people lose themselves, not because they didn't try, but because they gave up too soon. They didn't trust the process of small wins. They wanted the big leap, the instant transformation, the overnight success. And when it didn't come, they defaulted back to old habits. Self-leadership is having the vision to see what others can't see. The long-term power of consistency. It's believing that the small choices repeated faithfully will add up to something extraordinary. It's choosing to value the invisible over the immediate. Because while no single action defines you, the pattern of your actions always will. Let me give you an example. Imagine two people who both decide they want to become healthier. The first one goes all in. They overhaul their diet, start an intense workout program, buy all the gear, make a dramatic announcement. But because the change is so drastic, they can't sustain it. Within weeks, they're burned out, frustrated, and back to where they started. The second person takes a different approach. They decide to simply walk for 15 minutes every morning. That's it. Just 15 minutes. It doesn't feel like much, but it's manageable. And because it's manageable, they stick with it. Weeks turn into months. That small win becomes a habit. That habit creates momentum. And before long, the 15 minutes has become 30, then 45. The small win transformed into a lifestyle. Which one led themselves? The one who chose consistency over drama. The one who valued small wins over big leaps. The one who built trust with themselves day after day. That's how identity is formed, not through inspiration, but through repetition. The danger of ignoring small wins is that you also ignore small losses. And small losses accumulate just as powerfully. Skipping one workout doesn't ruin you, but skipping often enough becomes a story. I'm not consistent. Breaking one promise doesn't shatter your identity, but breaking enough of them creates doubt. I can't trust myself. Just like small wins build you, small losses chip away at you. And before you know it, you don't just lose habits, you lose yourself. The reason this matters so much is because identity is fragile. Who you believe you are is shaped by what you consistently do. If you consistently keep promises to yourself, you begin to believe, I am disciplined, I am capable, I can rely on me. But if you consistently break them, you start to believe the opposite. I'm lazy, I'm inconsistent, I'm not who I want to be. That's why leading yourself in the small things isn't optional. It's essential because your actions are always teaching your identity who you are. And here's the paradox: when you focus on small wins, the big wins actually come. The marathon gets run. The book gets finished. The career grows. The relationships deepen. But if you chase the big win without honoring the small ones, you end up with frustration and burnout. The shortcut never works. The long game always does. Self-leadership means understanding this truth. The smallest step forward still moves you closer than standing still. Progress is progress, no matter how small. And small progress compounds. It's like interest in a bank account. At first, it looks like nothing. Then, slowly, it begins to grow. And eventually, it multiplies into something massive. That's the power of consistent small wins. They're invisible at first, but unstoppable in the end. It's easy to admire people who seem extraordinary and forget that their extraordinariness was built on ordinary habits. The athlete who wins gold didn't just train hard one day. They trained consistently every day. The artist who creates a masterpiece didn't just have one burst of inspiration. They showed up to the canvas over and over. The leader who changes lives didn't just give one great speech. They lived their values daily until people trusted them. Behind every extraordinary story is a long trail of small, ordinary wins. So the question isn't, what big leap should I take? The question is, what small win can I create today? Can you keep one promise to yourself? Can you do one thing that aligns with the person you want to become? Can you choose one action that builds trust with yourself? Because if you can do that today and tomorrow and the day after, you'll create a trajectory that's unstoppable. Here's the most empowering part. Small wins are always within your control. Life can take away opportunities, resources, circumstances. But it can't take away your ability to make one small intentional choice today. That's the kind of power no one can strip from you. And that's the kind of power that leads to lasting self-leadership. You're either leading yourself or losing yourself. And in this context, the difference is simple. Leading yourself means honoring the power of small, consistent wins. Losing yourself means dismissing them as too small to matter. But the truth is everything matters, every choice counts, every action adds up. At the end of your life, you won't be defined by a single leap. You'll be defined by the countless small steps you took along the way. And the question will be, did those steps lead you closer to who you wanted to become or further away? The answer depends on how you lead yourself today. There's a line that separates people who grow from people who get stuck. It's not intelligence. It's not opportunity. It's not talent. It's ownership. Ownership is the defining difference between leading yourself and losing yourself. Because when you own your choices, you own your life. When you don't, you hand it away to circumstances, to excuses, to other people's expectations. And the truth is, you can't lead yourself if you're not willing to take responsibility for yourself. Here's what's uncomfortable. Ownership is hard. Blame is easy. Blame feels good in the moment. It lets us point at someone else and say, it's their fault. It's the system. It's the timing. It's the economy. It's the boss. And maybe all of that is true. Maybe those things really did make it harder. But here's the problem. The second you blame, you lose. You give away the one thing that gives you power, the ability to act, to choose, to change. Blame may protect your ego, but it imprisons your growth. Ownership, on the other hand, is liberating. It says, even if this wasn't my fault, it's still my responsibility. That's a radical shift, because responsibility puts the power back in your hands. You can't control everything that happens to you, but you can control how you respond. And the moment you decide that you're leading yourself, you're no longer waiting for life to be fair or easy, you're steering with what you have. Think about the people you admire most. They're not the ones who had perfect circumstances. They're the ones who faced setbacks, disappointments, failures, and chose ownership anyway. They said, I may not control the cards I was dealt, but I'll play them with everything I've got. That's leadership. And it always starts with the self. The opposite is losing yourself to victimhood. Victimhood says, I can't because of them. I can't because of this. And when you repeat that story long enough, you start to believe it. You stop trying. You stop hoping. You settle. And settling is another form of losing yourself, not because you didn't have potential, but because you refuse to own it. One of the most dangerous lies we tell ourselves is, I'll take responsibility when things are better. But that's backwards. Things get better when you take responsibility. Ownership isn't about waiting. It's about acting. Waiting for the perfect moment is how we lose years of our lives. Ownership creates momentum right now. But let's be honest, ownership is uncomfortable. It forces you to admit that sometimes you made the wrong choice. Sometimes you procrastinated. Sometimes you avoided. Sometimes you said yes when you should have said no. Ownership asks you to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I am where I am in part because of me. That's not easy. But it's also not the end of the story. Because once you admit it, you can change it. Once you own it, you can shift it. And that's the beauty of ownership. It doesn't just describe your past, it defines your future. I once heard someone say, responsibility is heavy, but it's the only weight that makes you stronger. That's true. Ownership is a burden, but it's also a gift. Because when you carry it, you discover you're stronger than you thought. And when you refuse it, you grow weaker than you ever imagined. Ownership is also about choices. Every choice you make, whether big or small, moves you closer to leading yourself or losing yourself. The food you eat, the words you speak, the habits you keep, the people you surround yourself with, they're all choices. And when you own them, you realize that your life is not an accident. It's a collection of decisions. Some were wise, some weren't. But they're yours. And when you own them, you also own the ability to choose differently moving forward. The gap between who you are and who you want to be is bridged by ownership. You can dream all day, but if you don't take responsibility for your actions, dreams remain fantasies. You can set goals, but if you don't own the daily choices that move you toward them, goals remain lists. Ownership is the hinge between intention and reality. Without it, nothing changes. With it, everything can. Here's the irony: ownership doesn't limit you. It frees you. People think responsibility is restrictive, like a set of rules holding you back. But it's actually the opposite. When you take ownership, you stop waiting for someone else to rescue you. You stop waiting for permission. You stop waiting for luck. You realize you already have the power to start moving, to start building, to start becoming. Ownership is freedom disguised as responsibility. Now, what does losing yourself look like in this context? It looks like living a life full of excuses. It looks like saying, I could have, but it looks like shifting blame so often that you forget you ever had a choice. And slowly you start to believe the excuses you've repeated. That's the tragedy. You begin to live a story where you're not the author anymore. You're just a character reacting to everything else. That's not leadership. That's surrender. But leading yourself means writing your own story. It doesn't mean you control everything that happens, but it means you decide what the story says about you. Did the setback define you or refine you? Did the failure end you or teach you? Did the obstacles stop you or sharpen you? Ownership decides. Without it, you lose yourself to the narrative life writes for you. And here's the final truth about ownership: it's contagious. When you lead yourself by owning your choices, others notice. They may not say it, but they see it. And over time, your example gives them permission to own it. That's the quiet power of self-leadership. You're not just leading yourself, you're creating a ripple effect. You're either leading yourself or losing yourself. And when it comes to ownership, the choice is clear. You can spend your life waiting, blaming, excusing, and lose yourself slowly, quietly, invisibly. Or you can decide right now to own it. To say, this is my life, these are my choices, and I will take responsibility for where I am and for where I'm going. It won't be easy. Ownership rarely is, but it will always be worth it. Because in the end, ownership isn't just about controlling outcomes, it's about becoming someone you can respect, someone you can trust, someone who, no matter what happens, knows they didn't hand their life away. And that, more than any success or achievement, is the true reward of self-leadership.